Hello, lovers. Welcome to another episode of the Venus Embodiment series. Today we have Christopher as our Venus in Scorpio astrologer. I am in a Venus year embarking on a collaborative astrology project to witness the laughter loving queen Venus through the different signs and life experiences of astrologers living with her, in hopes that through our exchanges of the experiential Venusian embodiments, the project helps others with similar Venus signs, house placements, aspects, rulership to feel seen, celebrated for their own Venus too, or that of their loved ones. I am Shahir, your love devotee. I'm a queer Muslim brown mystic who believes in love and everything is love. I am also a practicing astrologer, spirit guide connector, and tarot reader. Today, we have our wonderful Christopher, an educator, writer, diviner, and tarot scholar at the Red Read. We're going to put all the links below. Hi, Christopher. How are you today?
Hi, I'm all right. I'm hanging in there. It's eclipse season. So
Yes.
they're turbulent and wonky a little, but it's Friday,
Mm.
not day, and so that's always a good day.
Oh my God. Yeah, it is Venus Day. And would you like to introduce us your rising sign and your sun and moon?
Yes, of course.
And yeah.
So Taurus rising, and I have a Libra moon with
Mm-hmm.
Scorpio stellium, Scorpio sun, Scorpio Venus. And I have Aphrodite on these exactly on my ascendant, the asteroid. So, you
Oh
know,
my God.
yeah,
Aphrodite herself. Like you
Aphrodite.
are. Oh, oh my God, I love that. Oh wow. This is such a revelation for me. I did not know that you have asteroid Aphrodite on your ascendant. So, oh, I love that so much now. I mean, you are inherently a Taurus rising, so that's already being ruled by Venus, and now that's like an additional layer that we know about. Okay, so this is like a first question I always ask people um in terms of their own Venus sign. So as an astrologer, diviner, I know you're such a multi-practitioner. What and who is Venus um for you today or whenever, and how is your relationship to Venus as an archetype, but also to your, and then later on, perhaps you can elaborate more on the scorpionic Venus that you have in Italy and as a chart ruler as well.
And yes, as a chart ruler is the ruler of my luminary, my guiding light. Venus, I mean, what isn't Venus? No, Venus is Venus, I feel is like this energy, is this frequency that I recognize in nature, in beauty, in song, in the acts of kindness, in poetry. I feel it's just this pervasive, subtle, yet very powerful, gentle force of love. Honestly, I really see it as like a force of love that has sustained me throughout many, deaths of sorts, like many, like
Mhm.
experiencing death of others, but also my own like sort of ego deaths and whatnot. And it's at the core of my bones. I would say is Venus. Is just like in every embodiment, in every way. It's very femme. I mean, I'm a to the Scorpio part, very queer embodiment of Venus in the sense that
Mhm.
my femininity is like on the forefront and it's something I revel in. And because of our patriarchal culture or whatnot, it's taken a long time to find a space where that femininity is celebrated. And so it's music. It's just constantly shifting and shape shifting. And like I've been really into Willow's album the last couple days. Like it's been really
Mhm.
awesome and beautiful. It is just honestly music and art that just is like I feel a higher echelon of consciousness.
Mhm.
Every pre-civilization is make like starts off making culture in the making of art. Um, and the upper regions of that, of course, are language, right? And so I think of how Venus is a force that compels consciousness and like it pushes it is culture. So like Venus is
Mhm.
culture and pushes culture forward. But then
Mhm.
that leads to hopefully harmony and resolving of like injustices and
Mhm.
unions and a sense of self-worth and whatnot. And
Yeah.
so
Oh my God.
those questions, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I just want to like bounce off in terms of like even in terms of you starting it with like that larger archetype. It's almost like, yeah, Venus is almost like the embodiment of everything.
Mm,
It's like um love incarnate is Venus, right? It's like anything
mm,
that is love in origin, and I very much resonate with that. And I don't know why that just gave me that sort of like imagery for you. And yeah, even like the aesthetics that you're presenting, like we are presenting right now.
mm,
um it's very much a Venus sort of like exchange, and the ways of relating as well. I was just like thinking about that point. um and now we are going into the Scorpio archetype of your personal Venus. I would like to just share first, share screen for our listeners or people who are
viewer.
watching this on YouTube, viewers. um, so this is Christopher's birth chart. So we have the ascendant. Um, in Taurus, very much answering to this Venus located in the seventh house. So you are a seventh house stellium. So that's also very much relational, right? It's like everything is relationship. Oh, I mean, we know that inherently, but like um there are some charts for me. It's always like, yeah, this chart is like super exploding, sort of like deep relationships for you. So you have that Scorpio stellium, you have that Venus, very early degrees.
Mm,
Um, with Jupiter, with Mercury, and even like it's in the terms of Mars, in the decan of the phase of Mars, and also Venus also rules your um luminary, which is your Libra moon. And as well, Venus is answering to Mars, which is in Sagittarius, and Mars has this interesting mutual reception
mm,
situation with your Jupiter. So yeah, I would just like to share that. And so yeah, how does that feel for you as a person living and embodying Venus in Scorpio?
mm. I mean, challenging one, like certainly I think I'm so relationship oriented, and yet I'm always like, what even is relationship? And I've had many like hues and degrees of romance and platonic friendships to like sexual connection, like just there, but there's not been sort of like the normative paradigm that we're fed
Mm-hmm.
as early kids or whatever about what relationship looks like. And so it's gone through a lot of like I'm constantly doing relationship redefinition of sorts, and like learning and being
Mm.
mirror of relationship um hold me accountable in terms of what I say I want versus like what behavior I'm allowing or what boundary I'm crossing or not crossing, or we're not within my own self. um
Mm-hmm.
the Mars being a verse, is challenging, definitely. But like, so Jupiter steps in. And for a long time, I really thought, of course, of my chart ruler, it is obviously Venus,
Mm-hmm.
a detrimented Venus, a Venus which does not have dignity. And I've been really
Mm.
on that as well, like what it is to be in, like to have in indignity in relationships, like
Mm-hmm.
these moments where you're discarded or where your worth is not valued in a relationship, where you can get in an encounter that is less than when you don't have
Mm.
the dignity of your essence being respected in relationship, and like how you overcome and wash that away. And so I think Venus, like my relationship to Venus really does, it's so tied to Jupiter and Scorpio, like
Mhm,
and Mercury, like the three of them,
mhm.
is Jupiter, like they're just merged together, which is really nice. I really do.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a good blessing for the to counteract the indignity, if you will.
Mhm,
Um, so I've been switching to thinking of Venus as just like a solitary chart ruler, to really recognizing that it's like this love child of Venus, Jupiter, and Mercury is my chart ruler, that is like really encompassing who I am. And that's been changing because then it brings in community, and yes, the like, you know, slight mutual reception of Mars and Jupiter and whatnot.
but then there are reverse houses. Yeah,
Right.
I do feel sometimes like I do consider them less whenever there's mutual reception-ish going on, but they don't really see each other. So it's like, is there receptivity or is it just like
Right.
hid? Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like found themselves in each other's rooms and they're like, they're here. I don't where like, it's like yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But on the other
I just want to go back to the point that you're saying about um having a Venus placement that is related to indignity, right?
mm,
Um, Scorpio is the antithesis of Venus, right? We are working with like scarce resource, right? In one form or the other. And I love the word that you say discarded somehow, because there is this sort of scorpionic feel to it, um in terms of like the experience of being discarded, or even like the concept of being discarded too. It's like, oh, it's like the fringe, or like it's something that which is being removed, right?
mm,
um and it is kind of like, it is still a very, it's so interesting because it's almost like you have this, that Venus is never solitary as well. So as much as
mm,
it is in this kind of like position where it is less dignified, or even there's no dignity, or is it negative
right,
dignity, whatever
right. That, yeah.
technical terms people are using it. Um However, um, I love how you're even conceptualizing it in the sense of like, oh, I have other planets there that are in a way assisting that Venus, that does not perceive that Venus as like alone or solitary in her struggle,
Mm,
in a way too. And so um I kind of just like wonder, yeah, if you have any thoughts on that, because I was just like, oh yeah, like being ruled by this sort of like very lonely, or even like, being in a Scorpio kind of like scarce kind of like phase. um how is that kind of like shown in terms of like your
mm,
one-on-one friendships? Because I know seventh house is also like, people you meet as clients too. Is there a sort of like a resonance of experiences? Yeah, it was just like
mm.
something there.
So rich, so rich. Thank you so much. And thank you again just for having me on here. I'm so honored to just like sit here and praise the goddess with you. Um,
Mm-hmm.
definitely, I mean, really Jupiter and like music has a
Mm.
music is truly the spirit, like music is transcendent to me. Like it's been
Mm.
in my, Venus, I have such a seventh house stellium, which of course is is the gaze, you know what I mean? It's like the confrontation and the encounter with the other.
Mm.
And in Scorpio, I've definitely experienced like the abuse of neglect. Like I can see
Mhm.
the other person from a shadowy perspective. Like there's um, like sort of cognitive dissonance or the double consciousness that Dubois talks about in terms of like the enslaved have a clearer perspective of the oppressors because they're seeing their whole ass, whereas like the oppressors because of their all of their own blindness, it disables them from actually being able to fully perceive and appreciate the humanity, the genius, the rebellion, the resistance of the oppressed. But there is still like it can be used to our benefit in terms of being in the shadows and being veiled, but ultimately like a deep experience of neglect, right? Like abuse is
Mhm.
also of neglect and of not seeing someone, not being seen in relationship.
Mhm.
And I'm still figuring, finding and cultivating connections where I feel seen and where I allow myself to be seen. But in that neglect, in the absence of those relationships for so much of my life, it definitely hones other senses. Like when you lose sight,
Mhm.
if you will, right? Like your hearing and your subtlety and your ability to perceive the shadows and whatnot like increases. And so music, like I was saying, has always it's been like a gift from blessing. It was just like, okay, you're gonna be going through it relationally in
Mhm.
human forms, but like the relationship I have with musicians and artistry of all form has been a truly saving grace. Like it truly has saved my life and sustained me.
Oh
And it's
my
like
God.
the power of singing is,
Oh wow. Yeah, that made me think a lot about Dr. Olumi's interpretation
mm,
of Venus as, the ecstatic
mm,
dance.
mm,
And
mm,
for me, part of the Venusian possession for
mm,
you is like true music, right?
mm,
True um you know, obviously for me, it's like Venus is music, but Mercury is also like the vibrant, like you know, the vibrancy of that music, the
Mhm.
communication. And I feel like, oh my God, that's such a beautiful expression of your Venus being alive and being invigorated almost, right? And kind of just like feeling the ecstatic divination form through music that is healing. And so I kind of I really love that perspective of your Venus and Scorpio, kind of like finding that aliveness or finding that space. Another point I want, oh my God, what was it that missed out on my head? Um, that you raised that was very potent,
Mhm.
um was that, okay, even before going to the music, you were talking about like, yeah, when you are have less than, I was actually writing this as
Mhm.
well when I'm like writing my full moon horoscope,
Yeah.
because Venus is right now in Scorpio. I was just thinking about, people often think that when we have less than that, um or you know, in this says, you know, because classically whenever we talk about dignified and, you know, essential dignity, etc., we talk about resource, right? And I was
Right.
like, less than doesn't equate to less agency necessarily, right? I feel like agency is found through focus. It's like when you're at a scarce place, your resource is actually your focus, you know? So I was like thinking a lot
Mhm.
about that through the
Mhm.
Scorpio as a fixed water sign, where there is a reprioritization going on, right?
Mhm.
In terms of that Venus, is like, what am I focusing on? Like, what am I deeply focusing on, in order for me
Mhm.
to find what is truly value for me,
Mhm.
given that I don't have much, you know. Yeah, that just crossed my mind, because like I love how pointed you are, like saying that music is it like the channel. So it's almost like there's this sense of like focus of like, what is it that will help me feel resourced, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I love that consideration on like resourcefulness
Mhm.
and the distinction between quality and quantity is what you're talking like what I hear you saying like in terms of we may not have much, but it doesn't mean that it's we're any less than because we are
Mhm.
perishing of what we do possess are the value that we draw from what we do have or the relationships we have or the art we have in our life or whatever beauty
Mhm.
we're able to like beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Do you know what I mean? And so there's
Mhm.
a level where it's
Mhm.
like we have to, even despite the most horrid of circumstances, align ourselves to lineages which affirm beauty despite conditions of oppression. Like it is a form, beauty is a form of resistance. And
Mhm.
honestly, like, you know, being so Venusian in all the ways, like Aphrodite on the Senate, rising moon, like chart, you know, all the things. Um, just sort of being very naturally femme and like beautiful, if you will, as a
Mhm.
male and a male body in this world was
Mhm.
very um misogyny. You know, I experienced misogyny in a sense and homophobia because of that. So it's interesting that like the it's not even that I didn't have beauty necessarily, but like that based upon societal devaluations of what I have and the gifts and the way that I present or whatever, like then can made me, you know, for a time confused about my own sense of beauty and self-worth and whatnot. And then instead being like, you know what, no, I'm gonna claim my beauty and I'm going to find similarly like communities of other folks and like marginalized beauties and we're gonna just like uplift each other and that's been the move honestly lately. I'm going into a I'm going into a Libra perfection year, so Venus year and like on the 10th in a couple days, you know, like
Oh
soon
my
soon. And
God.
so um yeah, I think just cultivating what you're saying, like cultivating a perspective of appreciation is distinct is possible no matter the amount like you have
Mhm.
in a tangible way. Like there's like an intangible appreciation that we can always cultivate, despite
Mhm.
the circumstances and the context and the response of the community that we find ourselves
Mhm. And I would like to just point out that we're talking about beauty, and I love that, you know, your inherent pointing out the queerness, because I wanted to circle back to that even in the introduction we have made earlier, because I know you touched upon that idea. And there is a lot of like, not say buzzword, but like there is some sort of like discussion with people with like debilitated Venus and having some form of like queerness in a way, right? Of like LGBTIQ kind of like
Right.
identities, and although it's not being confirmed, etc. But yeah, it is very true, and Venus does rule everyone, right? Venus is, for me, like, it's like the non-patriarchy, or like the non male is everything, Venus rules them all kind of idea. And also like how much part of it too, I feel that with first, beauty is such a loaded thing, right? It's like, and I love like how you're talking about like, part of your role is to reclaim it, right? And that is so Scorpio Venus, right? It's like these are, the problematic standards that, queer phobia, homophobia, femphobia even, right? It's like all this culture that has
Mm,
classify beauty in terms of the gaze of the other.
mm,
You were talking about the
mhm,
gaze of another person. And so that is a lot to think about and to feel in your body, and to take on the shame perhaps too, right? And
mhm,
how do we change that by relating to other people, which is very Venusian, that embrace different, or not say different, like, a very radical, for me, it's like possibilities of what beauty is. Um, that's so Venusian. Oh my God. Oh, I love that. Yeah, and I am like, honestly, I have Aries Venus, right? It's like I am always concerned with my aesthetics. It's like sun, I also have like that sun, Venus, being combust, but also approaching my sun very loudly. Um,
yeah.
and I think it's like there is always a struggle whether I am like, yeah, I do feel like I am feminine sometimes, but at the same time, I feel like there's this conflict of like, oh no, it's also very Martian. So that's like, oh, it's like such a struggle to like just, such a struggle, but there's also such ease
Mm,
into kind of like tapping into this different um what's the word for it? Archetype of presentation,
mm,
so in a way, a point that I kind of like remembered was like the role of Venus as some sort of like the dual goddess that can play it all. It's like,
mm.
um, and so yeah, that's just something that comes up in my mind. Oh, I love that we're going deep into that Venus
And I
idea
love
of,
we both have
yeah.
a Martial Venus, like there is
Mm-hmm.
like Mars, a resist, like Mars is to provoke and to resist and to tear down and to push against and to
Mm-hmm.
aggravate and to, like to fight in a sense. And so like how does Venus find herself where she wants to create harmony in relationship where she has to fight? Like it's very paradoxical, right? And there is an inherent queerness in navigating gender, like which Venus is of course associated with,
Mm-hmm.
like having a contrary or just queer gender experiences because of that inherent awareness of power, which I think like a
Mm-hmm.
Martial Venus of, it's like, oh, it's okay for them to dress and be pretty, but it's not okay for me to be pretty or whatever, and dress in the ways that I want to. Okay, well, let me provoke then and like claim that space or whatever. I have to separate, I have to push against the structures that would, um, that would limit that or like for all the reasons. And it's deep work. It really is deep work and it's not easy. And I think that, I mean, I'd be curious about your relationships as well in terms of how this plays out, very, very personally. Cause I think it's
Mm-hmm.
one to it's easier. I think we often see like a greater clarity of language coming through around identifying like patriarchy and like all the terrible sources or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but how we how we orient to them within our interpersonal relationships. And like I think of the Six of Pentacles in particular, which is like not my decan of mine is the Seven of Pentacles, Taurus three,
Mm-hmm.
Taurus rising. But that card where it is like there's a clear power imbalance in that card and in certain relationships. Like if I'm like, hey, Shahir, like having a bad day, like maybe you should go out and like take a trip somewhere or whatever, right? And it's just like, okay, but that for whatever financial reason may not be feasible. And if I there and spot you or something, there's a power dynamic that's asserted, and that we can
Mhm.
does not exist separate from the larger, the larger forces that be. And so like how in
Mhm.
relation, how am I, and this is a big focus for me at the time, is like discernment around who I'm in
Mhm.
relationship with, and making sure that um they have a similar orientation and stance towards and response towards these oppressive structures, even if the
Mhm.
power differential is not the same. Like because they're just like like unless I find someone sort of like brown and queer and like exactly in the sense like it's still there's still going to be a power differential in terms of our embodied lived experience and like
Mhm.
our own personality. And so like that's gonna come up in terms of like if you get in relationship with like someone with Venus and Taurus, or like Venus and Libra or whatever, Venus and Pisces, and their experience is gonna be like way different, and their
Mhm.
power be different. But
Mhm.
can they be in relationship with someone who is navigating that power imbalance in a responsive and in a way that's like accountable and transparent, and like
Oh my god. Yeah. Yeah. Oh my god, I love that we're going on to discussion of power here, which is very Scorpio, like very
yeah.
Scorpio to be talking about power. And I love that you're pointing out like the power differentials and
Mhm.
imbalances in some way or form. And I love the point differentials because sometimes when we focus on like the imbalance, it's almost as if like, okay, but it's like someone has more power than you. In some ways, yeah, but at the same time, it's like it's a very different form of power as well. That's why I love you. I love the way you use power differentials. And I feel like Scorpio Venus have very intimate understanding of that, of like they're able to detect some sort of like, oh, there's a deeply power imbalance here in this relationship, or having to experience some form of that in their life through their relationships, to their own personal internal values of their different inner selves, etc. um and I was like, oh wow, yeah, that's very true. The point on power, and sometimes we don't even realize it, right? And I feel like um part of your question of me like having a Mars ruled Venus, right? I feel like sometimes I feel Mars ruled Venus feels too much. It feels like, oh, I'm just doing something and it's already feeling too much. Like it's like um I can't give a example of it, but like there is a tendency to overdo, but not like the overdoing, but it's like the provoking nature. It's like, as you're saying, the provoking nature can definitely address that. um and having to fight, that's for sure. And I feel like Scorpio Venus is more they're, I think Aries Venus is more like, oh, like blunt or like forceful forward. Like Scorpio Venus, probably for me in my head, it's just like they're taking their time, but at the same time there is also a deep discernment of like that attunement to the differential power that you're talking about, that is inherent. And I love that as an insight. Yeah.
I love what you're saying. I mean, I think of well, the difference between like the Aries Venus versus Scorpio Venus, but they're both the like sister Venuses because both being Martial ruled,
Yeah,
um, is well, they're both hunters,
the
right? Like they're
hunters.
both
Yeah.
huntresses, like All's Fair in Love and War and whatnot. But the Aries Venus, I think, is yes, very upfront, very like, hey, like when it was like last time Venus was in Aries, like I love that energy because I'm like, come forth, like be bold, like ask for the number, like hit, like make your move, shoot your shot, very thing. Whereas like Venus and Scorpio is like the art of seduction. I really feel it's very vampiric, where it's like
Mm-hmm.
in, like there's prey, but like it's like a it's like a confusion in terms of like the flower that is so it's like alluring, but like making you think that you're pursuing me, but really I'm pursuing you by like drawing you in. Do you know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
like
It's
the Venus
very it's
trap.
Yes, the Venus flytrap. I love that. I was reading Austin Coppock's delineations of that decan with like the Mars, and I think there is that allure. that sense of, so what is it trying to attract? And I do feel, um and I was also thinking about like Scorpio Venus is more nocturnal than Aries Venus. So that's why Aries Venus, as I am, is more of like that forthcoming, direct, literally just like, like, like sometimes I can be very much brash in some ways. Um, but like, yeah, there is that Scorpio Venus is that art of seduction and pulling it in, but also there is like a huge mystery of like, what am I devouring? It's
Mm,
like, it's almost like the sense of like you attract it, but then at the same time you also have perhaps a sense of unsureness. What is it that you're consuming in a way? It's like, oh, you're pulling in like a nice food. I mean, like such a Taurian experience, but like, at the same time, like you don't know what you're gonna be biting. It's almost like, oh, like, that Snow White or whatever feeling of just like,
yeah,
oh, right, it's like being attracted and then like pulling it in, and then it's like you don't know what you're gonna
yeah,
get.
yeah. That's so it exactly. That's so it exactly.
Yeah,
That's Snow White.
yeah.
Poisoned apple, bitch. Like you
The
poisoned
point,
me,
the
and it's
poison.
on poisons and Scorpio and poisons and all the things like full on.
I know. I know. I feel like that. Oh my God. I love that imagery. Yeah. The poison apple is literally Venus and Scorpio.
Literally
It's like, oh my God. And now I'm thinking
resolve.
about like, yeah.
How does that resolve in the she gets kissed by the prince of true love or whatever? Have like the
I
kiss,
think so.
right?
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course. Um, which is like I think like Venus and Scorpio it can be a real alchemist in that sense of like I'm gonna love you
Mm-hmm.
by like helping you release yourself, like have a catharsis. I'm gonna help you by like letting like unconstipate you basically emotionally. I'm gonna like we're gonna clear this emotional backlog of waters and all of the pain stored in the heart, and it's gonna hurt and it's gonna feel like because we're gonna take the poison out of your
Mm-hmm.
heart, of your system that you've ingested in terms of your own sense of self-worth, your own presentation, your own repression.
Mm-hmm.
I think of Venus and Scorpio, and as we were talking about with neglect as well before, or
Mm-hmm.
not having resource can then become an internalized um, complex like around sustenance and nourishment and needs and like how you get your needs met and thinking like, well, this need has never been met. Maybe it's something wrong with me. Like, why do I keep having hunger? And it's very repressed, Marshall,
Mm-hmm.
Scorpio, like complex things. And then being like, oh, it's just that's the nature of hunger is to like keep you alive and just like pursue, like in pursuit of pleasure and like, and so there is though, like you're saying, the temperance and the discernment again of like what am I biting into? Like, what am I being drawn by? Like, am I in control of my desires or my desires controlling me? You know, and
Mm.
the
Yeah.
patient for sure. It's
Oh
not
my
easy.
God. I love that. And I love the way that you're also saying that part of it, Venus and Scorpio power perhaps too is, the alchemical, transmutation as you're saying, right? It's like, let's clear this out, let's do this together. I've seen that a lot in terms of my Venus and Scorpio friends, of like that sense of like the bond, or um that shared, trauma even, right? It's almost just like there are certain experiences, I feel like Venus and Scorpio, they just get it um
Mm,
because they know like the deep of the deep, for me, like the image that comes to my mind is like, someone going into the deep, into the caves, right? And kind of just like, all right, how it feels like to be in there. And there is and but then you also know how to get back outside to the sun, which is like the idea of like changing and alchemy, in a way. And I do feel like Venus and Scorpio as a sign, I mean, as we're experiencing the transit right now, yeah, the energy of alchemical transmutation is very much alive. And it's and I think it's also just about like confronting the darkness, right? It is a Venus that is perhaps even comfortable with the Shadowland, not in the sense of like wanting to be in there forever, but there is this degree of like really like relatability, like you can relate to it, but also the survival, like knowing how to survive in there.
mm,
Um That's also what comes to my mind right now.
And yeah, I think about my chart, and I mean, I think about my solar return charts. I think about, of course, obviously my natal chart and whatnot, and just how I'm like, it just makes sense in terms of like the incarnate. I'm like, it's not all easy or whatever, but I'm like, it really does make
Mm-hmm.
sense. It's so much emphasis on the seventh house, which of course is like, as we were talking about the gaze, which
Mm-hmm.
very illumination. It's very like I'm seeing you. So there's like a
Mm-hmm.
solar um implication in that. But we can't, I mean, I guess we can, but like, without there's harm if you stare into the sun, right? Like that level of intensity of being seen, like when you turn on all the lights and there's no shadow anywhere, there's no depth there. It's just like washes you out. It becomes like a white room, like where you feel crazy,
Mm.
like it's overbearing. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
my chart is very twilight. It is technically a night chart, but because the sun is right on that like setting, it's very six of
I know.
cups,
Yeah.
golden hour. And I think of like the moon being the luminary of the sect is you can moon gaze though. Like I moon gaze endlessly. Like when it's dark, when there's little light, you can get really up close. You can get really intimate. You can because things are softened. There's not the harsh like awareness of like, oh, there's your wrinkle or like your little bump or whatever. It's like it softens under the darkness, and then that comes. You draw each other closer, and so I think with like the intensity of the soul gaze that I seek in relationship. Like I'm really trying to see someone to the bone and blood, and I'm trying to have like a soul, you know,
Mm-hmm.
in like level of like loving shadow and all requires the light to be low. You know what I
Oh
mean? Like
my
it
God.
that
I
in the
love
poem.
that. Yeah, and let's just get into it too. Like, what kind of like evokes that imagery for me was also like a form of like pleasure and like, what people, Venus also like in the 12, like, it rejoices in this fifth house, which is like, the where, the sex is, etc. And I
Yes.
love that sense of like the moon gaze that you point out because I feel like, lately I've been doing a lot of like, healing the erotic part of myself, like the more
Mm,
sexual part of myself. And then, sometimes people say like, you do mirror work, for example, if you look at yourself, your body, and then you affirm it. But then at the same time, it can
mm,
feel so a lot, right? You're just like, oh my God, I'm looking at this mirror, I'm looking at everything wrong with my body, and I'm just like, that doesn't work because that it's hyper exposure. But
mm-hmm.
then when you pull down, like, you turn off the lights,
You light some candles.
you like some candles, and then it's a very sensual experience, but there's also a sense of like, you're touching yourself, whatever you're dancing. Um, there is a deeper intimacy with the parts of us in the darkness, right? It's like you don't judge it as like a hyper solar exposure. You go into the nocturnal lens of the moonlight intimacy, and I love that. Oh my God, I love that because there is a degree that like, yeah, I don't care about that, like, I don't care that, there's like cracked skin, whatever, kind of feeling, or like I have scratches somewhere, whatever, on my
Right.
body,
Right.
stretch marks,
Right.
etc. And then I was just like, yeah, I think that is, oh wow, that's so revelatory about the body.
It was revel.
For me.
I was like sitting moon, like literally, it wasn't.
Mhm.
It's not this eclipse lunation that I've been moon gazing necessarily. I mean, I
Okay.
have,
The
but it
big
was a
boom.
pretty, and I was really like sitting and just reflecting that like I can stare intently, like very Queen of Cups, in the sense of like that gaze. It's like I don't want to look like as deep as I love, like you're saying, it can be provoking, like bell hooks, of course. My
Uh-huh.
dear ancestor, teacher, who we all love, of course, but
We
like,
love bell hooks.
I'm like, I feel like I'm like the one presenting the apple to her. Like I'm like so her
Mm-hmm.
love child. But anyhow, that true love will come and people run the other way because when you're in love, when like to commit and to choose and to build love requires honesty and it requires transparency and being seen. And so like all the masks, all those shame that we've had, like, oh, don't see that stretch mark or don't see that scar, like love's gonna see it. And if you haven't accepted and are able to be compassionate with your own what you think is your ugliness in a sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, is going to reject the blessing of that love, which is of course gracious and forgiving, and it's not like blame. It's not putting the blame of your own scars necessarily on you, or is like
Mm-hmm.
lessening of your beauty or your worth, they're going to like love you over that. But many people, of course, run the other way. You know what I mean? Many, of course, can't handle that gaze. They can't handle the intensity of like love comes, and it's like, I'm gonna look under the sheets. I'm gonna look at you naked. You know what I mean? Soul and
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, and so it's like it's an interesting play between like seeing the shadow and like being like how we can be more comfortable in shadow to show ourselves nakedly, but then how also we hide from our shadows being seen when we're
Mm-hmm.
confronted with the nation of love. You know, it's said that like illumination is not when like illumination is when you are seen, when you are truly seen, you know, when you are
Mm-hmm.
loved.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's like really like
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, it makes me think a lot about like, yeah, because sometimes like love, Venus makes you really want to run away, um, in one form or the other. And that is part of that is, I mean, not everything, but part of that is definitely because of like the refusal or even like of the shadow or even like being scared of like confronting it, right? Oh my God, it's like there is definitely like so much there.
so I
um
love I love I do as well. I mean my Libra moon and whatnot. But like it's so healing to
mhm.
like self pleasure in front of the mirror and like dance and just
I love that.
like mirror healing and whatnot. Like you gotta practice. You know what I mean? You
Oh
gotta
my God, that's true. That's true. Yeah, on that point, I want to talk a bit about your Libra moon. How does that feel? I think we had a Libra moon person before too. And funny enough, yeah, Janaba was in the Venus and
mm,
Virgo episode. So it's kind of
yeah.
interesting to see the kind of astrologers I am approaching, but also the ones that are surfacing.
Mm,
To volunteer themselves to this. And another astrologer which had the quote unquote fallen venus
right.
venus in Virgo was Janaba. And Janaba, they also had a Libra moon. So I was like, all right, how does that feel for you in terms of like your sixth house, in terms of whole sign, moon in the sixth house,
Yeah.
trying to resource that Venus, right? I have to say this though, I'm always like saying this because somehow I think I want to put out a theory or hypothesis on this because I am planning a written form on it. Um, the idea that aversion, right? The idea that when the ruler is in averse, I feel like that planet is, in a way, it's like there's a perpetual longing happening to that planet. I mean, these are all theoretical. This is like just me, like
No,
vibing with a chart or whatever.
you just made me realize like the chain of aversion that I have in my chart in terms of like
Yeah,
ruler of Venus is a verse and then the ruler of my moon is a, like it's kind of touched.
yeah.
Yeah. Dang it, but go on.
So, okay, so for you, your Libra moon is averse to your Scorpio Venus. So there is this the internal mother, the mothering, the care, that is trying to find beauty in that care, right? It's trying to like perpetually trying to find like who can give me the confirmation, who is leading this, who is like, for me sometimes I see rulership as like a nod, it's like a nod, like some like that moon is like trying to find, like, in terms of all the six house work that you do, whatever your sense of service to your community, your health, whatever, your well-being, your embodiment. Moon, right? Moon has a lot to do with the internal but also the embodied, your security. But then it's always like trying to search for that nod from that Venus, right? It's like, but then the Venus is in aversion, so it's like it will never. I'm saying it will never. Transits happen, so it will definitely activate, but it is almost in this perpetual search for a confirmation, for a witness of seeing themselves. But what end up happening for me is that, like, I mean, at least for my theory, is that planets which are in aversion to their ruler, they end up reclaiming that space as their own. It's almost like I don't have anyone to say yes to whatever condition I am at. Like, in a way, it's not like a really a form of validation necessarily. I think it is a point of like guidance. I think it's like that. It's like planets which are lost, quote unquote, in my head, they don't have guidance, so they end up just doing it. But then there's also a feeling of emptiness, not necessarily of recognition, but like of whether am I doing it right? Am I like what? And then, but then they end up mastering that craft because of them repeating doing it without any guidance, you know? So
Well,
that's
I
my theory.
love that. I love that. That brings up so much to mind. In so many, in a lot of ways. So hopefully I can maintain all the threats. But it brings into mind like moon and like ancestry and the aversion there of there being an absence of like my own gender expression, my own femininity, my own ways of being in relationship, and having no models. You know what I mean? Like
Mm.
that I did had aren't applicable because they're not queer, they're straight and
Mm-hmm.
whatever else. But then aside from the gender dynamic, the dynamic itself, right, in terms of like care and reciprocity, mutuality, or abuse and
Mm-hmm.
servitude and like gaslighting, all the like it was just not applicable, and so there is like an absence. And I've been
Mm-hmm.
really reflecting on this with my Saturn return, especially of like bitch, you have authority. Like I have authority.
Mm-hmm.
I am my own authority, and it's very, and so this, as you're talking in with the moon, it makes me think of the moon card in the tarot, where that's the moment of like you like who let the dogs out, like it's like this moment where you were, it's that card is a measurement of domestication and wildness.
Mm-hmm.
When you've
Mm-hmm.
been domesticated, when you've put on a leash, when you've been a leash, which is like, of course, like a form of being collared, of being enslaved, sixth house, right?
Mm-hmm.
My moon in the sixth house definitely connects me to an ancestry of those in servitude, those in bondage,
Mm-hmm.
those who have had to deny their own needs and their own being seen fully in relationship to attend to like being mammy, basically, right? For others,
Mm-hmm.
like power over them. But that when you break free of that leash, when you get out of that situation of bondage and you're like roaming around, there's like a ghost boundary syndrome or something. Like how you have like ghost limb syndrome or whatever it is when
Yes,
you
yes.
like when you lose like a previous leash, there's a sense of like, well, where is the boundary? Like where is the limit? Like how do I know, as you're saying, where is my measurement scale for like, am I doing this right? You're like constantly looking for a higher authority to bow to. And it takes a long time to be like, bitch, you're your own authority. Like you're out, however, whatever way it works for you is the way that you are validating it to be done. And that's like been the journey of this lifetime, is just like, because I was like, an overachiever in school. I was very like,
Mm-hmm.
please, like, let me cross my T's, get 100, be, on that old scale. And it still didn't leave me
Mm-hmm.
with what I needed. You know what I mean? So now I'm
Oh
like,
my God.
I don't care if anyone else thinks I'm crazy or intelligent or dumb or like whatever BS. It's like I'm gonna do me because I have authority, because like you said, I'm the one who's been getting me free. I'm the one who's been feeding me and tending and comforting me. And not just me, obviously, like thankfully I have like beautiful people in my
Yes, yeah.
at a very core emotional need place, like you were talking about, like
Mm-hmm.
void. Um, like I have to just bow to my own authority, and that is a reclaim. Like that takes time to reclaim. And so like, sorry, I'm last thread about this, but the feeling like I don't have, like, as a person of colonized, who is descent, who has had
Mm-hmm.
the lands and the ancestry, like there's a severance, when there is
There's
a
a severance. Yeah.
loss of ancestry, there's a loss of tradition, there's a loss of um there's a loss of those ancestors in a sense. And so for me, I love my Libra moon. Really, I love like the by sign trine with Saturn.
Mm-hmm.
Very,
Yeah.
I think we often speak about chosen family, obviously. And to fill that void, I advocate chosen ancestry, in that they find you,
Mm-hmm.
they reach you. Like bell hooks reached towards me to fill that void. I felt Toni Morrison, Mariah Carey, like Jill Scott, Marvin Gaye, like, people who
Mm-hmm.
various bodies of work have reached and found me, and I had an immediate appreciation of. And as time has progressed, I know them, like I know culture, like Libra moon, right? Like Libra is so cultured and like
Oh
the
my
aesthetic.
God, I love that.
But I know it with so much more appreciation, rather than like a haughtiness or like to lord over someone with like my own kind of cultural knowledge. But
Mm-hmm.
because it's filling the void, so I don't take it for granted. I'm like, I've lived with it. I've lived with these albums, and they only gain in value the longer I live with them. I love things that you can continuously over years return to them and like you're only getting to know them more so because of the time that passes. And it's not like, I mean, I'll do a deep, Scorpio 1 dive into like if I had like a moment, but
Obsession of
no, or whatever. But like I live with them. Like it's not a simple thing. Whereas I think that people who have had that, perhaps white folks, white peers, people who
Mm-hmm.
have like records of their ancestry, take them for granted, and they don't.
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm like, I know these stories. I know, like, I claim my own chosen ancestry because of that void, and so like I really fucking know them. Like I know, I really know them, and I think that's
Yeah.
as well.
That is so beautiful. Oh my God, whatever you're saying. And I think it's like, yeah, and that mastery comes from ways of choosing your own ancestry. And I love the point that you were talking about the moon as ancestry, and I definitely see that. Um, and not having to see its rulers, like really not knowing of like the role model, etc. And I feel like the Saturnian kind of like trine. I mean, Saturn is also the exaltation lord, so it's like that it's a some form of witnessing there, but it's also the margins, right? Saturn rules the margins. And so there is some sort of this story that you're like rebalancing that loss of ancestry through chosen ancestry, and queer. I love the idea of like queer. I call them like my queer ancestors, right?
Yeah.
It's like yeah, that is, oh my God, I love that. And like even the gods are, for me, it's just like they are in a form of like queer ancestors. And for me personally too, for example, like I am Muslim, and I go by like the Sufi tradition even more. I always just feel like, yeah, I don't know why I'm longing for this learning this topic, but then I feel like I have had ancestors who did that, right? And even trying to find role models of those quote unquote ancestors in real life. um and so
Mm.
that's deep, and that is perhaps a way of you rebalancing that story. And I love how you're saying about the idea of like the ghost limb, or like the shadow
Mm.
the shadow leash that was going on, right? um that gives such a rich imagination for me, in terms of your chart, or even in terms of anyone with some sort of like this sense of like their placement not being able to witness a role model or some sort of like confirmation from the external. And
Mm.
at the end of the day, it's all you, right? You are giving yourself the authority and also the agency. That's beautiful. I am like, I have like such a beautiful appreciation, and how you're reframing that through music again, through scholarships, right? It's like that's why that Jupiter comes in as well, like all the words. And it seems like you have a very deep and personal intimacy with this role models too, right? And I know even that is also part of your curriculum. Whenever you're teaching tarot, you always share all this amazing quotes by different people and even from yourself. And I feel like that is very much alive. Your
Mm.
your 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 Libra moon and your Venus in Scorpio very much establish that sense of like deep um relationship with your chosen ancestry. Oh my God. Oh wow. I love that. Oh my God. Okay, I want to share your chart one last time just to kind of like see what else we can talk about. Um Okay, yeah, that trine. We do have like, yeah, that trine exaltation ruler. Um, yeah, and I love like, you really the first and the sixth house experience so well with regards to your identity as a queer person, like navigating all this gender performance, gender identity, etc. Um, do you have
Mm.
anything else? Do you have anything else that comes up for you?
I mean, just as you were talking with that too, it's like we may not see them, like they may be averse in a sense, but
Mm-hmm.
they see us. And like I do feel
Yeah.
had an awareness that, like, though I may not see, like I've always felt an awareness of like being watched over. Even when
Mm.
I was like no one, like I was waiting when I was forgotten about, like very literally, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I feel that like I really wasn't, and I felt like there was like just cultures have opened for me in other ways. And I mean, Mars with the North Node in Sag and whatnot, and like the Jupiter, Mercury, Venus, like I love culture crossing. I love being a global citizen, a citizen of the world,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
the like they find you, and I think it's not about, it's more than, again, skin. It's more than like the exterior. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it's a resonance in the soul that is like we carry our ancestry in our bone knowing. That's what I mean. And I've like, as I've
Mm-hmm.
been more firm presenting and like on different days, I really see, thankfully I have known both of my grandmothers in this life. Not me, I don't know how far we can go back in terms of like knowing my
Mm-hmm.
great grandmothers and whatnot, but like I really am looking like my grandmother, on my maternal grandmother, as like I
Mm-hmm.
continue to, I find such power in that, just in terms of her own story and her own like the things she faced and whatnot. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that I mean, there's also that deep respect, like Saturn Moon, like of the grandmothers. You know what I mean? Like of the elders.
Mm, yeah, yeah, yeah. The
Frequency.
reverence of the elders. Oh, I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah, that seems to be such a beautiful way of like looking at it too, of the configuration. Yeah, because Venus are like all that is like, which is like feminine in nature, and whatever your relationship with is that word. Because I know sometimes it's controversial to say that, sometimes it's not. It's like everyone has a different relationship to different words at the end of the day. It's
Yes.
like thank you so much for that. Yeah, so do you have any last, I call it last message, for me it's like, yeah, any last love letter messages to anyone out there with, their Venus in Scorpio, and with all this, I say pop astrology, but like, there are certain astrology that will really say that's like, oh my god, that's like an unlovable Venus, etc., right?
Yeah.
Or having a bit of a bad rap, etc. So what message you have, your PSA?
Mm, I love is the recognition, and then maybe it's so easy to recognize a power imbalance, like a clear power imbalance when someone else may be like of others' relationships that we have seen or witnessed, ones that we've been in. But I think like mostly we deserve love, and you deserve to be seen. You deserve to um not you deserve the patience of the love transforming, like you deserve the time it takes and the care and the grace and the affirmation and encouragement required to see the love that you've known in your life transform and find a new form, and that it will find a new form, and that not to like not to falter in waiting for that, and settling for less and crossing your own boundaries. And it's mainly like this relationship is, we can draw whoever we want in, because that power of Venus and Scorpio is like very sexy, come hither. But again, like the main thing is you honoring your own boundaries as like Venus and Scorpio, like you really being firm about what you desire and knowing you're worth that desire, and that you don't have, and like the fear of like, oh, I'll just take this because I don't know if what I really want is ever going to come. um I would just say have faith that it will come, and that like as you're being more honest and more like firm on those interior boundaries with yourself and what you allow in or not, is going to just be so affirming and healing and nourishing. And also like a reminder that like the dark goddess, of which of course I'm a devotee of, like, my Venus in Scorpio is a black Madonna. Okay, she is
Mm.
Madonna, she is not a white, Venus. Okay, she is black. Okay, um, is that like your self love, like you can be whole, like you don't need a consort, you can be independent. And I think there's something about Venus and Scorpio that is like, I've severed relationship to a normative or patriarchal male partner. Maybe I've freed myself from marriage, and I'm independent and I'm whole and I'm self-contained, and I'm not losing or missing anything. Whatever I allow into my life is from desire, not from need. You know.
Oh my God. I love that. The desire in it. Wow, that's beautiful. I don't know what else to say. And I love that you point out that, the dark goddesses, and literally because, recently during the Kazimi, I actually light a candle, white and black, because I was like, Venus loves black, the color black, as much as she loves white. It's like, because there's always this other, if you see like altar for Venus, etc., it's always like white, or like
Right.
pink, all those love. But I'm like, no, Venus loves the color black as much
I
as
mean, Venus and Scorpio one, I was like, sad it was never so sexy. At least in fall and the death, like, bitch, you could wear all the coats. You know what I mean? Have the full coat all the time. It's like
exactly the
the,
fall aesthetic,
the
it's
fall.
giving. Yeah. Oh wow. Oh my God, this conversation is so generative. And I hope like anyone who's listening to this have some comments or whatever. Feel free. So thank you so much, Chris, for sharing your insights and bouncing off all these amazing ideas of yeah, and I definitely for sure know someone out there with Venus and Scorpio feels so like seen and celebrated for that placement.
Thank you for spending time and seeing me and just to talk about my Venus and everything. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you for everyone who's listening and watching this episode. So stay tuned for the next one, which is Venus in Sagittarius.
Yay.
Goodbye.
Bye.